Greetings, Embers, newbies, and the peekaboos. Welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. Before we begin, if you enjoy the way I narrate these stories, a subscribe, like, comment, or share would be highly appreciated. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the elite members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continued support, for you know you are the strongest pillars that holds this channel up. I can never express my gratitude enough. Thank you so much. If you would like to learn how to become a member or would like to buy me a coffee, those two options can be found down below. Without further ado, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled A True Jumble of Disturbing Stories. Right after this intro, an ad will play. I'll read the first story an ad will play, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. I am a guy, which is why this is more funny to me that this happened rather than I'm scared for my life, but it's still creepy. I was at the flea market by the end of Walmart when a guy who was like 50, kind of overweight and had dark gray hair. We first encountered when we were towards the front of the store. I'm not a social person, so whenever he introduced himself to me so randomly, I thought it was quite weird. I also thought the way he was looking at me was also weird. Around 10 to 15 minutes later, in the store, the man came up to me again and said, "I'm new here. Do you know where the bathroom is?" I thought this was super weird considering he walked past many people to say this to, and I said something like, "I haven't been here before. I don't know. I think it's over there." And he walked away. I'm very judgmental towards people, and even told myself maybe I was looking into it too much, but I knew to keep my distance from this guy. At this point, I was almost done in the store, and I didn't see him again until I got into my car. He must have been watching me, because where he was at in the store for him to walk out was the complete opposite side of where I had walked out, like 20 seconds after me. He was staring at me the entire time he walked out, and he waved. And at this point, I thought he was an undercover cop trying to keep an eye on me the way he was looking at me the entire time. So as I'm pulling off, he's still staring at me in the middle of the parking lot, and I'm staring into my side mirror. What? He's standing there, staring, sucking on his index finger, and waving me to come back. I wished I would have recorded him or gone back to see who he was, but I was just too in shock, to be honest. I just drove off. Should I report this to the store or what should happen? For a guy following me and then I catch him sucking his finger while looking in my direction truly disturbs me as I'm a female. Honestly, I feel like people need to be aware of this creep. This happened in my family when I was about 5 years old, so around 1997. At that time, we lived with my mom, grandmother, and grandfather in a 3-room apartment on the 6th floor in Ukraine, in Kherson City, in a large neighborhood called Shumensky. Those were criminal times in all post-Soviet countries. Not much changed since then. And I was raised very strictly from a young age not to trust strangers and never to open the door to anyone unfamiliar. One day, someone knocked on our door during the day. At home, it was just my mom and myself. My mom approached the door and asked, "Who's there?" A male voice replied, "Open up. This is the police. We need to ask you some questions." My mom first looked through the peephole and indeed saw 2 men in police uniforms standing at the door. Only after that did she open the door. My mom asked them what the matter was and what had happened. In response, they started asking her who was currently at home and how many people were in the apartment. I came closer and saw them. They looked at me, and I got scared and ran into another room. At that moment, my mom sensed something was wrong and tried to close the door. But one of the men put his foot in the way and held the door with his hand, preventing her from closing it. My mom, now frightened, asked again what they wanted, but they just silently stared at her without answering. An eerie silence hung in the air. Suddenly, our neighbor opened the door. She lived on the same floor as us and was about to leave her apartment on an errand. The two policemen immediately changed their expressions, looked towards the neighbor, and she noticed them too. With a questioning look, she glanced at my mom. Then suddenly, the two men ran down the stairs and out of the building. It was terrifying. We had no idea what they wanted, but one thing was clear. They had likely bought the police uniform somewhere or stole it, and it was certainly not real police officers. To this day, we still thank our neighbor because who knows the true intentions of what those two men wanted dressed in their fake police uniforms. So, fake policemen, let's never meet again. These events happened to me between the ages of 6 and 9. Everything began when I was visiting my cousin when I was about 6 years old. My cousin was a year older than me, and back then, she was very adventurous. So we went into the forest near my school. Everything in the forest went normal, and it was around 1 p.m., so we weren't expecting anything weird to happen until we climbed down a small hill and I slipped to the ground. My cousin came down to help me, but as soon as she got down, a big shadow jumped over us. We both saw and heard it and swore to each other we didn't lie about it. We knew it couldn't have been an animal because we were in a small forest surrounded by a city. We ran out of the forest because we were little and got scared easily. 1 year later, I was again with my cousin, and we had come to the conclusion that what we saw was an animal. Again, we decided to go on a little adventure, but this time to a different forest around 2 kilometers away from that last forest. We were looking after an old bunker from the Second World War, which my friends had told me about. But since we were braver than before, we went there at 6 p.m., and it was already getting dark. We both looked for the bunker for hours, but decided to split up after looking around for a long time. I'd gotten used to the forest already, even though I never saw the bunker. But this time the forest felt different. It felt like I was in a forest far, far away from the city, and I couldn't recognize anything, even though the sun hadn't fully gone down. I shouted my cousin's name because it was already coming so late. We had to go back home, but to no response. I started panicking a little and ran into a random direction until I recognized a rope swinging in one of the trees and knew I was close to the forest's edge. I walked along the path until I heard my cousin shouting my name, and I stopped and shouted back. Then she came over a little hill and ran to me. She said she was shouting my name and was irritated that I hadn't responded. I told her I was shouting too, but neither of us heard each other back there. We went back home and didn't think more about what had happened. Almost 2 years later, we were back in the forest looking for the bunker. We remember when talking about some old memories. This time, we didn't split up and actually found the bunker. We looked inside with our flashlight and were disgusted of what we saw. Inside the old bunker, there was old burned candles, a pentagram, and some liquids. We didn't want to stay near the bunker and left fast because we thought someone might actually come there. Everything was normal until we got to the old rope swing. It was swinging back and forth when we came near it. No one else was there with us, so we took up our pace, knowing we were near home. When we already saw her home, we heard footsteps behind us. We looked behind us, but saw nothing. Still, the footsteps were coming towards us, until I felt a bump on my shoulder and the footsteps passed us. I looked at my cousin and asked her if she heard the footsteps, and she nodded. I was the most scared I had ever been, and we ran straight to her home and told her mom. But reasonably, she didn't believe us when we told her about the footsteps. To this day, I haven't told anyone about these experiences and never thought to connect them together. But now that I'm older, I realize just how similar they were to each other. I was in the military, stationed in Germany. I was put in a group called Quick Reaction Force, or QRF. Sounds cool to citizens, but we were just running security checks on the fences around each post. Unlike in America, with one large post, the military has several small posts all across the area, and our job was to check all the fences around each small post. We were the night shift team, and things progressed over the months of doing this to absolute and complete boredom. So, one of our team, being that Germany is one of the most haunted places in the world, supposedly, started looking for hauntings in our local area. We were surprised to find one of the posts we were checking the fences on has a haunted barracks. Even better, we were about to give this post back to the German government. All soldiers, equipped, everything has been removed from this post, and the American government was simply holding on to the post because we said we would give it back on whatever specific date they picked, etc. We as QRF had to do rounds on each post every night, including this post. Added benefit of patrolling the abandoned post as our job was to ensure no one broke in. No one has taken up residence in these buildings, etc. So we do all of our checks, skipping this post for last so we will have as much time as possible to do our investigating. Now, we do the standard checking of the post, fencing, buildings, all the things we were supposed to do, and end at the haunted building. To our dismay, all doors and entrance posts were locked up tight, as they should be, and we are not going to break anything to get inside, because we would get in a shit ton of trouble. Then, one of our 5-man team, one being female, finds a window that has been left open. I know this sounds coincidental, and it would make the story better if we had actually broken a window, but in all fairness, a lot of soldiers are lazy, and a window was left open. The entrance. First thing, this is a German building, beautifully built, and the first floor window is high to get to. Remember, this comes up later. It would take at least 2 people to get into this building without some parkour training, but I digress. We make entrance and we are all still here to do a job. So we do conduct ourselves properly and begin to clear the building, looking to see if someone left this window open as an entrance point for themselves, but due to the height of the window, we all deemed it pretty unlikely. According to the haunting story, the haunt is on the 3rd floor. So we do as soldiers should do, going room to room, clearing the 1st floor, moving to the basement, then to the 2nd floor, skip the 3rd floor, clear the attic, and back to the 3rd floor, starting at the opposite side of the building from room 303. Once we get to room 303, oddly, the door was wide open. Only one in the building like that. Before we got there, mind you. We skip it, clear the other rooms, and finally rest at 303. We know for facts that we are the only ones in this building with no signs of people having taken up residence in its abandonment. The haunting. I found a website covering this occurrence, specifically Mannheim Turkey Barracks, for all you internet sleuths. This is very real, so this is why I make it easy for you. That website is theshadowlands.net/places/Germany.htm. The part you may not find on the internet is whenever a soldier leaves a room unexpectedly, a report has to be made. We found 2 occurrences when a soldier removed themselves from this room 20 years apart, stating almost identical stories of waking up to a little girl in their room, then disappearing into the shadows. The soldiers made a report with the on-duty NCO, non-commissioned officer, and would not cross the doorway going back into the room, having to wake up other soldiers to go into the room and remove their items across the threshold of the room. Supposedly, this haunting little girl's name is Sandy. Entering the room. This looked at first like the 100 rooms we had been in prior to coming to this room. Keep in mind, this barracks was not dilapidated. When I say Americans used to be in this barracks, it wasn't years. It was months since this was used. My unit, myself included, was one of the ones that helped clean this place out. We took some pictures in the room. Hey, we survived room 303. Haha, funny, right? Pause if you know me. I am an asshole and have to push the envelope. As my team is laughing, we survived, I pop off laughter with, Sandy. You could honestly hear everyone in the room, 4th point of contact, clench. Shut the... Same time, background noise. Muffled noise from the hallway. Silence. Moments felt like an eternity. Do it again, the NCO quietly and whisperingly commanded. Sandy. Muffled. Yes. The next moments are as if time fast-forwarded, making up for the time that when it stood still. I remember seeing the NCO and the female soldier taking off like they had been hit with lightning, barely catching up with them on the landing of the stairs. That was just past 301 heading down. They ran to the window of the room straight ahead of the landing like they were going to jump out of it, until I informed them we were on the 2nd floor, not the 1st. They swiftly turned around, running the length of the building, down the other side of the building's set of stairs, getting us to the original window that was left open. I catch up to them again before we get outside. Hold up. Catching my breath and stopping them. Everyone calm down. We are building this up. The look of dread almost fleeing from their faces. Really kind of setting in. We all conversate about how ridiculous we are being. I think secretly talking ourselves down in our own heads as we let our nervous laughter out. Attempt number 2. Gathering ourselves up for an attempt number 2, we trek across the 1st floor to the stairs, almost directly below room 303. We begin our ascent, almost in complete silence, gripping our weapons. Yes, fully armed on this detail. Maybe a little more firmly. The building in complete silence. We reach the top of the stairs. Yes, this building has an attic, but those stairs are not directly connected to the stairs we are on, but in an adjacent door at the other end of the top of the main stairs. Take the left and proceed back into room 303. In the room, it was silence amongst us. Everyone looked dead at me, like, go ahead and do it. Not gonna lie, I was hesitant. Sandy. In the hallway, it almost sounded like a giggle. A good friend of mine, we will refer to as John, was on this detail with me. I stack on the door, pieing the corner, military stuff, not exposing the majority of my body, and do the right side lean, weapon raised, realizing John is doing the exact same maneuver on his knees underneath me. To a civilian, this would look like the old Scooby-Doo cartoons, with heads leaning out of the door, stacked on top of one another, but with raised rifles. I see in the dim light almost what looked like the last glimpse of a little girl's leg, with the old-timey socks and a shoe run into a room, maybe 2 or 3 doors down. Thinking my eyes are playing tricks, I hear, "Did you see that?" At this exact moment, my heart goes from a mile a minute to a complete normal pace. I gained full grasp of everything like you normally are, and not adrenaline high mind, but my body is full rushed. Deep breath, step back into the room. What was that? What did you see? Nothing. We saw nothing. In the calmest voice I have possibly ever used. You ask him, "Did you see that? What did you see?" Asking John. I cut the question off. "Everything fine. Everyone calm down." The room goes silent. "Do it again. Do it again." The group turns to me. Calmly. "Sandy." As if standing in front of me in the middle of our little huddled group, invisible to the naked eye. "Yes." Leaving the room. In an absolute panic, my newfound calm complexity exited existence. Stairs are not stairs. They are mere latch pads, clearing 5, 10 stairs at a time. Flying down the stairs is an understatement. Getting across the first floor hall, this massively long hallway, maybe took 5 or 6 steps. That high window we had to work to get in was wide open. I swan dived out of that window just before contacting the ground. I do a tuck and roll maneuver, bringing me right to my feet. Looking back, it would have probably been my best ever and beautiful. Did I forget to say, oh yeah, I was the absolute first out of 303, down the stair, down the hallway, and completely out that building. We all managed to escape the building unscathed, and as the last of us leave the building, we just start to laugh, like the safety of the outside is all that was needed. Realizing we are still there to do a job, I get hoisted back in, alone. I secure the window and find the only door, thankfully close to the window, that acts as a one-way and is not chained shut. I rejoin the others in the back right of the building as we are all taking pictures. "Ha, we survived," cycling through who's holding the camera, so everyone gets 5 or 6 pictures in total. The pictures. The camera we are all using is those old digital cameras, not the ones we have today with zoom and all that craziness. Pixelated screen, kids' toys have better screens today than what we were using. If you know, you know. If you haven't put it together by now, our main location or control area is not on this small post, but the main post, a ways away. We laugh and joke on the trip back about how you were scared, blah, 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 and nervous laughter, like we made it all up in our heads. We get back to our area and start loading the pictures we took from behind the building, capturing how scarring the building looks in the barely lit area, but nearby streetlights. As we load the photos, which obviously come on in taken series, we start to see something coming into frame in the 3rd floor window directly above us, looking almost like a shadowish type form. I, sitting on the provided couch, hear a gasp come from across the room, from the female looking at the pictures on the computer. All of us are now instantly leaning over her shoulder, looking at these pictures on the computer. All of us are now instantly leaning over her shoulder, looking at these pictures. Next picture, the shadow became more and more defined. Next picture, more and more defined, till there are two forms, like one adult and one child. Next picture, the shadows are gone. Zoom back out. They are now on the second floor, right above us. The smiles on our faces in the pictures seem almost idiotic at this point. Next picture, more and more defined. It's not even a question at this point. This was two outlines of people, shrouded in an all-consuming darkness. The backdrop behind them showing light barely creeping through the building from the street lamps, through the windows on the other side of the building. Then, nothing. Now in the pictures, that tall wall, us standing on the grass, the window a couple feet above our heads. They stand. They are a bent over reach from the tops of our heads. Us now smiling, laughing, not thinking twice that maybe, just maybe, whatever the hell those two things are, couldn't leave the building. So stupid we didn't even notice. And then the last photo was taken. A month later, I am back at my unit, no longer on the detail. The post I was on had a German road drive beside it, cutting us off from what we call the annex, with 2 or 3 more barracks on it. They are easily seen from my barracks window. I had a soldier over there. We will just call him Tom. Tom and John shared a wall in this barracks. On a random Saturday, middle of the night, I was awoken to a phone call from my first sergeant. I have to go to the post housing office. I have to get the keys to the room that wasn't being used in my barracks because Tom was now going to take that room. Odd, but barracks can get rowdy at night. So my thought was someone got into a fight. 2 people were getting separated. Booze was probably involved, etc. Tom moves in, everything is fine. Monday comes around and everyone keeps asking me why Tom switched barracks in the middle of the night. There was no party, no anything. They went to sleep. He was here. They woke up, then he was in my barracks. They found it odd. I asked Tom and he wouldn't tell me. Then John found me and told me something that brought this memory flooding back. John was woken up in the middle of the night because Tom refused to go back into his room, and John had to carry all of Tom's things out of the room before Tom would help. Tom was not on the QRF detail with myself and John. Furthermore, John, myself, and everyone else on that detail didn't tell anyone about what happened at that haunted barracks because the military is a young man high school. The grapevine is strong, and though doing our job, they can find some way to get you in trouble or people will go looking for themselves, which was, in our own opinion, worse. I harp on Tom, and he won't tell me anything. Again and again. I try, but he doesn't tell me. Tom is not a religious man, to my knowledge, nor is he the type to believe in ghosts or anything like that. So the curiosity was killing me. Finally, on Saturday night, weeks, maybe a month later, I bring down some beers and BS with Tom, like we did when we were all broke, aka not payday weekend, and I get him just lit enough for him to tell me a story. Tom's story. Tom was sleeping when, for some strange odd reason, he woke up. Unsure why he sits up in his bed to gather his surrounding. As his eyes adjust, he sees a little girl at the foot of his bed. Immediately wide awake, he crawls backwards to the headboard, eyes fixated on the girl. "What are you doing in here?" As the girl giggles and steps backwards into the darkness, she disappears. Step being interpreted since as she moved back. Tom could see she had no legs, and was more floating there before disappearing. I had read the story before. It's extremely close to the two soldiers' stories that moved out of room 303. Believe this story or don't, your belief does not make me change what I believe, and the story is written best of my memory and what it can provide. I embellished nothing, and there is a part 2 to this story when we returned. Spoiler, nothing happened. No ghosts, no shadows, nothing. I write this to simply share what got my interest into the paranormal. My name is Fool's Errand, and I have told this story before on my page. I am not hiding. Do your own research. If you find those I speak about in those posts, feel free to ask them. However, I ask you to keep their names off the internet because it is not right to dox people. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to my story. I apologize in advance if my story is too long. I tried to write down as many details as I could remember. This took place a while ago, but I'll probably never forget it. I was around 21 at the time, and I'm female. Was still fairly new in my city. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship, wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know a lot of people in town besides my ex and his friends. I was on the dating and hookup app looking for people to hang out casually with, maybe find a friend with benefit or something. I had matched with a 25-year-old guy, Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days. He explained he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music. It was just audio on YouTube with a heavily edited still image of 4 or 5 guys playing rock instruments. One of them looked like him. The music was an interesting combination of styles and not really for me, but whatever. He seemed like a nice enough guy. He stopped replying for a few days and I figured that was that. Moved on. Then one day, I was at work and got a message from him saying sorry he'd been so busy and invited me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in their yard. He had explained that their band manager was providing them the house to live in. Based on the lack of views on their YouTube video and the fact I only saw one photo of him playing in the band, I figured he was probably exaggerating the band manager thing. I thought it was more likely something along the lines of a bar manager friend giving them a discount on rent in exchange for being a house band at their bar or something, and didn't think much of it beyond that. Normally, I would have just said no to going to a barbecue alone at the home of someone I really didn't know. But I was really bored and figured I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends there since he made it sound like a pretty big party. I put the neighborhood he gave me into maps and it was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. I figured being in a yard on such a nice summer day wouldn't be overly risky because lots of neighbors would be outside. Plus, it was just a few train stops away from my workplace, and I was off in a few hours. I did tell him I wasn't overly comfortable with the idea since I didn't know him well, but I would stop by for a bit if I didn't need to go inside the house at all. He said that was totally fine, which made me feel a lot better. I even made sure to not drink anything for the rest of my shift so I wouldn't be risking needing to go inside to use the bathroom. I was anxious about just showing up to a barbecue with people I didn't know at all, as he implied that the event was already underway. Plus, I would have had a hard time finding a specific address from the backyard side. So I asked Simon if he could meet me at the train station, since he said it was a quick walk away. He agreed to do that, and I let him know that I was leaving work and what time maps said the train would get to a station. I sent Simon a message to tell him that I had arrived at the station at around 5:30 after I looked around and couldn't find him. He told me he was running behind and to just start walking towards the neighborhood. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I saw him slowly wandering towards me. I recognized his clothes, wearing bell-bottoms when they were not common, especially for men, and long hair from far away. But up close, his face looked pretty different from his photos. It might have been some heavy-duty editing. I don't even know, but he kind of looked like a different guy. Older looking than the 25-year-old guy in the photos by 5 to 10 years. Maybe he used photos of his brother or something. I don't even know. It was before AI. This was the first real red flag, but I brushed it off. Maybe he's just self-conscious. Maybe he smokes a lot and doesn't wear sunscreen and hasn't taken pictures in a while. All of his pictures looked candid, so I figured he wasn't much of a selfie guy. And besides, I'm mostly here to make friends anyway, so I shouldn't judge his appearance so harshly. He was also clearly already drunk, but a lot of his ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem strange. He's hosting a barbecue after all. The second red flag came shortly after when we arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house, but he reassured me we would just have to walk through to get to the backyard. Okay, fine. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard. We would have had to backtrack to the main road to go down the alley directly to the backyard. I figured he just forgot what I said about not wanting to go inside and didn't want to cause a bunch of trouble, so I went with it. We got in the house and he immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and knob behind me. I didn't think that was too weird since nobody was hanging out inside and a lot of people are just in the habit of locking the door when they come in. But it did still give me the heebie-jeebies for some reason. Then Simon told me he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined and reminded him that I was just here for the barbecue. He said that he and his bandmates had worked really hard to get the house, and he was really proud of it. At that point, I was getting really skeptical because usually when guys would tell me these things, that seemed a bit far-fetched. They'd let the truth slip by the time they got me to their house. But still, I convinced myself that I was being unreasonable. I was already in the stupid house anyway. He insisted it be quick. Not the wisest choice, I know. But I was pretty good at explaining away red flags. So, at this point, Simon still mostly had a dopey stoner art guy kind of vibe as far as I was concerned. He really didn't seem like a threat, just an insecure oddball who sucks at communicating and fibs a bit. Not unlike my ex, who was definitely emotional and verbally abusive, but it never escalated past that. I figured at worst he'd get handsy and I'd get called a prude for not sleeping with him. I didn't have a lot of self-worth at the time, obviously, so I went with it. The tour started pretty uneventfully. Other than that, the decor in the common areas were obviously chosen by middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiasts, and not a bunch of guys in a band or their fake band manager. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse. On one hand, he was clearly lying, but on the other hand, it made me think it was possibly just someone else's mom's house, and she was out of town, and he didn't want to tell me he lived at a friend's parents and didn't actually have a paying job. Again, total red flag, but I could rationalize it at the time. The bedroom doors were all closed. Bathroom was unremarkable. He then showed me the kitchen, and I finally saw through the window that there was nobody in the backyard. There weren't even barbecue supplies around. No burgers thawing on the counter. No cocktail supplies lying around. Nothing. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue. And he told me that his bandmates were on tour still, that they were just running behind due to band trouble, but they should be back any minute so we could start the party. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them, if he's in the band. I don't even remember what his answer was to that because it didn't make any sense. At this point, I'm out of mental gymnastics to convince myself that this guy isn't just completely full of shit, and I'm really freaked out. Took long enough. I'm smarter now. Don't worry. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. And I hoped that once he was done with this tour, we could go outside, even just for a minute, and I'd just leave. I'd been in some sketchy situations in the past, but luckily, nothing so bad that they tried very hard to physically stop me when I walked away in a semi-public place. I just wasn't comfortable doing it inside the house. I knew this guy was full of shit, but I had no idea how much worse it could get. I instinctively proceeded to believe his bullshit. He offered me a beer. I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning. He said okay and cracked one open for himself. Then he wanted to take the tour downstairs. I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was the dark and creepy kind with really small windows, so I refused. I asked if we can go back outside. He said after the tour. I tried to argue about going into the basement. I told him I have a spider phobia, don't like basements, etc. All lies, but anything that wouldn't let him realize that he was what I was afraid of. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured it would be better to just let him show me the damn basement, and then hopefully we could go outside because I really didn't know what else to do. The basement was fairly unremarkable. Couch, TV, elliptical. Until I noticed something that gave me chills. The house was probably built in the 1990s or late 80s at the absolute earliest. But I saw a door that looked like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house, the kind that only opened from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges. It looked really out of place in this house. I would absolutely not go anywhere near that door. He opened it and told me it was their soundproof music studio. I looked inside from a few meters away. It did indeed look soundproof. It was about the size of a bedroom, and I could see a few guitars and amps in it. Mattress toppers on the walls. No drum kits or recording equipment that I could see. He insisted I go inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door, motioning me to go inside. Holy shit, the alarm bells are really going off now. At this point, I realized I could really die here if I'm not careful, and I turned around to run up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me, asking what was wrong, acting like I'm being all unreasonable for not wanting to see his soundproof music studio. So I'm realizing that this is a way sketchier situation than any of my ex's bullshit, and I am freaked out right now. At that point, my main objective was getting out of this house. The front and back doors were both closed and locked, so even if I tried to run, he'd be able to get to me before I could get the locks open. The bathroom did not have a window. The house had a convoluted floor plan that I wasn't familiar with, and he was much bigger than I am. He was the tall, lanky type who can run fast, even if they're out of shape, and smoke a pack a day. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit. We made small talk for a few minutes. He cracked open another beer, and thankfully he calmed down. I desperately mentioned, yet again, that it was beautiful outside and suggested we go sit in the yard while we wait. He said no and started to get agitated, that I wanted to leave already. I told him that I could stay, but I'd just really like to smoke a cigarette. He told me that we could smoke cigarettes inside and pointed to a cereal bowl full of cigarette butts. Ugh, god damn it. We sat down at the table and lit some cigarettes. As he was smoking, he started rolling a joint, which he promptly lit as soon as the cigarette was done. He offered me some and I said no thank you. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff I could. I'm a pretty seasoned weed smoker, but I pretended to cough excessively and told him I'm a novice, so that's more than enough for me. For a liar himself, he thankfully wasn't very good at picking up on the lies of others. After we smoked, he asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates get back. I told him that I was really looking forward to spending the day outside and suggested we go for a walk or visit the park. Ideas he did not like nor appreciate. At this point, I was trying to keep as much distance possible between us, but he stayed close enough to me that I could smell the beer on his breath. He grabbed me by the waist, and I backed away and asked about the barbecue food to try and change the subject and make him think I still believed what he was telling me. He started to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates should be home any moment, and my anxiety was absolutely through the roof. I tried to calm him down again with generic small talk. Now, I don't know how I got so lucky, but the next thing that happened might have saved me. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer and pulled out an empty box. At this point, he's getting even more pissed off than before. So I went out on a limb, suggested we go get some more beer for the party. Because I was out of ideas, I was terrified that it would enrage him even more to suggest, once again, that we leave the house. But I had to try. Thankfully, though, his eyes lit up with the possibility that I could actually be down to drink with him, and he agreed. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan because I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this fucking menace in this weirdly desolate suburb. But I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I walked with him to the liquor store, and when we got there, I told him I didn't need to go inside if he was just going to go grab some beer. He insisted that I go inside. At that point, I was so stressed and frazzled, I just went with him and hoped that a good opportunity to leave would arise. When we got inside the liquor store, he asked what kind of beer I wanted. I reminded him that I had to work tomorrow and didn't want to drink much. He demanded to know what kind of beer I wanted, so I just named the first one that came to my mind. We went to pay. The cashier was kind of an asshole, so I didn't ask for help. I probably should have, but I panicked and didn't. I hoped there might be somebody in the parking lot who might help me if I made a scene. But there was no one. I really regretted not asking the liquor store guy for help, but also remembered the times my ex told people I was crazy, so they wouldn't take me seriously. Liquor store guy definitely seems like he would have fell for that, so probably for the best I didn't expect him to help me. I had one last idea before I took my chances, just trying to run and or scream. There was a drugstore across from the liquor store. I told Simon I had to go buy a toothbrush or some shit that vaguely implied I might stay over. He eagerly agreed to this, but tried to follow me into the store. I told him that you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I don't know if that's even the truth. I really doubt it's any kind of law, but luckily this drunk douchebag believed it and agreed to wait outside. Now, my naive ass thought maybe I could just wander around into this drugstore for long enough, and he would either get the hint or get sketched out or bored and leave. But no, I must have wandered around that store for at least half an hour, and this jackass is still standing there, staring in the window. This creep didn't even have his phone out. Every time I checked, if he was still there, he was just staring through the window, looking for me. I didn't feel like I had anybody I could call in the city to come help me. The cops here usually take things like this very seriously, and the store workers looked like they were mostly high school students, and I didn't want to drag them into this. So I really didn't feel like I had a lot of options. After being in there for so long, I was surprised he didn't come in to see what was taking me so long. I thought maybe I could lose him in the aisles and sneak out of the store if he did come in. But no. I ended up hovering around the tills and waited until a big group of friendly-looking people were paying. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly enough to imply that I would make a scene if need be. Simon looked at the people getting in their car, who were now pausing and looking at us because I had nearly yelled at him, and then he just turned around and left. It was bizarrely anticlimactic, which I was very thankful for. I ran to the train station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house from the store, and I never heard from him again. When I got home, his app profile had either blocked me or been deleted. Years later, after I stopped compartmentalizing the whole thing, I wished I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again with someone else, but made sure the fridge was stocked first. But at the same time, I didn't think anybody would take me seriously. I was embarrassed of my choices, and I just wanted to move on from the entire thing. Plus, all I really had was a, likely fake, first name and a general idea of where the house was, which probably wasn't even his. I'll probably never know any more than I do now, and maybe that's for the best. Anyway, Simon, you lying piece of shit. I hope I never see you again. It was the summer of 2021 when it all started. The air was the perfect temperature, neither too warm nor too cold. Perfect. My cottage in northern Ontario sits in a secluded small town region. I wouldn't say it is far away from civilization, but it's quite desolate. It is the kind of place where you can take a deep breath in and say, "This is life." My cottage is by the lake, so I love to fish at night. It's something I picked up from my dad and cousin. It feels like you've escaped the noise of the world when you're up north. At least that's what I thought when I first pulled up one late night. The surrounding area is peaceful, save for the occasional loon's call or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. There's even an old abandoned barn nearby that has always seemed out of place, like a relic from a horror movie or something. Between the cottage and the main road lies Wolf Fang Forest, a name I gave it as a kid after noticing its fang-like outline on Google Earth. Silly, maybe, but it stuck. That night, as I pulled into the driveway at around 11:30 p.m., the world felt pretty still. My Volvo, a truck I've cherished for years, was packed with summer gear, water toys, food, camping supplies, the usual shebang. Traffic had been brutal on the way, forcing me to take an unfamiliar route. My parents and cousin had arrived earlier in the day, when the sun was still high, and I was traveling with family friends and relatives who were eager to hit the bunks. After helping them unload and settle inside, I lingered outside to finish unpacking. There were a few bags left to take inside with toys, towels, and other toiletries. It was then that I heard it. Faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the background hum of a forest. A tune, jaunty and mechanical, mixed with bursts of high-pitched laughter. It wasn't the joyous kind of laughter you'd hear at a carnival or when you're hanging out with your friend who has had one too many drinks. It was distorted. It sounded like an old record being played backwards. For a moment, I froze. The sound was distant, somewhere beyond the forest, but unmistakable. I shook it off, telling myself it was my imagination. Who the fuck plays circus music in the middle of the night in Northern Ontario? I forced myself to work on the task at hand, hauling the last of the luggage inside. I mean, someone had to do the work. When I mentioned the noise to my cousin, he laughed it off. He insinuated it was probably some drunk kids messing around. His nonchalance was almost convincing, but then again, he's pretty much always nonchalant. Something about that sound clung to me, though. Who was it? The nearest cabin was quite far away, and no one here I know of is really the type to play that kind of stuff, especially loudly in the middle of the night. Later, as the rest of the family settled in, my cousin and I went outside to store the bikes and other gear in a garage. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, nothing, just the rhythmic chirp of crickets. It was quite relaxing, and believe you me, I was ecstatic. I didn't hear those hellish clown noises again. Then, right then, when I had assumed the noise had stopped, it happened again. The laughter. This time it was closer, louder, the same warped tune, repeating like a broken music box. My cousin stopped mid-step and turned to me immediately. The first time I've actually seen him show another emotion other than a smug, nonchalant expression. I nodded at him. No words needed to be said. We both knew something was going on. Or, well, we know the obvious. Some jerks were probably trying to mess with us. Without another word, we walked to the garage, our footsteps crunching against the gravel. We didn't care. We were the men of the house, after all. We were not going to let some teenage college students scare us. We had a job to do, and we didn't want to hinder or wake up our resting family. When we reached the door to the garage, my cousin pulled the door open and shut it behind us. I turned on the light switch, and we let out a sigh of relief, basking in the woody smell of the garage structure. We stood in silence, staring at each other. I could see my cousin was a bit shaken up. Now that I look back at it, I can see why. Someone is out there and knows we are here, but we don't know where they are. Despite my cousin being the gung-ho type of man who goes to the gym often, his confident, nonchalant attitude diminished as soon as we stepped foot into that garage. I knew my aunt put some flashlights in the garage, so I spent a few minutes looking while my cousin slowly paced around the room. We didn't hear the clown noises, but only for the reason the hum of the lights blocked out any possible sounds or the ability for one to hear their own thoughts. I found a flashlight behind a few boxes in a drawer, and I remembered the exact exchange that went down in the garage that night. "I'm going to find out where it's coming from," I said. "You're joking," my cousin said. But I wasn't. Something about that sound gnawed at me, an instinct screaming that it did not belong here. I told my cousin to walk, or as he interpreted it, run to the cottage, and locked the door. I didn't want anyone getting into the cottage. I didn't want anything to happen, and I was going to ensure that. I opened the door to the garage and walked out as I watched my cousin sprint to the cottage door. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked down the road, flashlight on and in hand. The forest loomed on either side of the gravel road. It felt like a tunnel. The laughter returned, faint but persistent, weaving its way through the trees. Every step I took seemed to draw it closer. Maybe it was at the end of the road, I thought. And then, as I pointed my flashlight through the trees, skimming for anything out of the ordinary, I heard it. A small sound. A crunch. The crunch of something on a falling leaf. The crunch of a footstep. Not mine. Something was following me. I stopped, my heart ready to pump itself right out of my chest cavity, and swung the flashlight towards the noise. Nothing. Just the dense wall of trees. It was probably a bird or animal. I mean, we're in the middle of northern Ontario after all. I didn't know what time it was, but it was probably past 45. The sound continued though. I couldn't tell if it was in the trees or down the road, but it grew louder. And as much as I didn't want to accept it, the noises grew louder. My breath quickened as I scanned the forest, constantly looking over my shoulder. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a glint of metal, a flash of movement, but it was gone before I could be sure. Maybe a nail or a piece of debris that was reflecting it. Honestly, I was finding any and all possible excuses to calm my mind. But then, the sound shifted. It wasn't just the crunch of leaves anymore. It was heavier, deliberate. Footsteps. Human footsteps. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" I called out. I didn't know what to do. The word barely echoed before it was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. Nothing answered. No rustling, no response. Just the low hum of crickets and my ragged breathing. I took a step back, my foot crunching against the gravel road, and that's when it happened. A sound I will never forget. A low, distorted laugh. Not joyful, not natural, but garbled, like a broken record of a clown's gaggle between dragged through mud. It came from my right, deep within the trees, maybe 3 or 4 meters away. My body tensed as my instincts screamed at me to run. My hand tightened around the flashlight, and I swung the beam wildly across the source of the sound. This time, I saw something move, a figure hiding down behind the tree stump and some shrubs. My legs felt like lead, my chest tightening with every breath. I couldn't scream. The air seemed stuck in my throat. I don't know how long I stood there. I broke, the fight or flight instinct kicking in, and I turned on my heel, sprinting back toward the cottage as fast as my legs would carry me. The flashlight bobbing wildly, illuminating fragments of the gravel, road, and trees. In the distance, the laugh twisted into something guttural, almost like growling. The cottage lights came into view, but I didn't stop, didn't turn around, and even as the laughs grew louder, my feet hit the front stone steps, and I threw open the door, slamming it shut and locking it behind me. I remember the adrenaline and the absolute shock scaring me so much I almost fainted and vomited. My mom looked up from the living room. I couldn't speak. I was clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. My cousin appeared from my family relative's room. His face pale as my uncle and father looked at me. I remember my dad giving my mom a hand gesture and kneeling down beside me. "You heard it too, didn't you?" he whispered. I nodded. My dad exchanged a glance with my mom and uncle, clearly trying to downplay the fear spreading across my face. My stomach was convulsing and I was gagging, close to throwing up. My cousin and I locked the doors and windows that night, double-checking every latch and deadbolt. Even then, I didn't feel safe. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cottage made my pulse race and sweat form on my brow. Every gust of wind against the window made me want to jump into action. Somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness of northern Ontario, someone was waiting. Someone was out there. Around 3 a.m., I awoke to the sound of creaking wood. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, and it grew louder with each passing second. The dock. Someone was walking down the dock. My blood ran cold. I got out of bed and turned on the lights. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, heart hammering in my chest, until exhaustion finally overtook me and I went back to bed. When I emerged the next morning, there were footprints on the dock. Muddy footprints. Muddy footprints. They were huge, heavy, and unmistakable. They circled the cottage, leading to the dock and back again. I wished I could say it was all in my head, that I could explain away the strange noises, the laughter, the footprints, but I can't. Someone was out there, someone that didn't belong. And as I sit here writing this, the world feels quieter than ever. Too quiet. I don't know if I'm alone when I go up there anymore. I don't know. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to a true jumble of disturbing stories. Before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge the rest of the membership of BackToAshes. Thank you all so much for your continued support, for you are the glue that holds this entire operation together. To the newbies and the peekaboos and everyone else, including the membership, thank you all so much for your support and interaction with the channel. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have a voice and there would not be a channel. So thank you all so much for choosing BackToAshes. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please stay safe out there. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.